Welcome once again to Sid Caudle. And Sid, we're going to start with the lovely Ed Miliband, who keeps his. Well, I don't know what he's up to. Yes, I do know what he's up to. Let's be dead honest about this. Certain stuff is coming out about what we're paying in the United Kingdom for our electricity. It's killing the economy. More of this later, but all they do is stand up saying it's 14 years of Tory rule that's killed the economy and it's Trump's fault and other fairy stories like that. But you've got to look at the prices we're paying, which is more than anybody else in the developed world for our electricity. And it's down to Uncle Ed.
Yeah, I mean that's one factor. Yeah, absolutely. And they've actually set up, since they were elected in 2024, seven new environment quangos, which cost an enormous amount of money, and it's all promoting net zero. I mean, one of the quangos is actually a net zero quango. And I was reading a report today from the Climate Action Committee, which was basically spent £6 million making a report to say we're not prepared if the temperature rises another 2 degrees by 2030. Although they were saying we've actually achieved all the targets for net zero. We would say we've achieved all the targets, but we're still going to have a 2% rise in temperature by 2030, and we're not prepared for it. So they spent £6 million producing that report. It's just like, and you think that's just one small quango. I mean, there's so many of them, and none of them are actually producing any electricity. None of them are achieving anything other than writing stupid reports. And what they're actually doing is closing down North Sea oil, and in order to achieve supposedly net zero. And it's absolutely disastrous, like you say, for the economy, because the end result is a lot more expensive electricity. And Labour promised exactly the opposite. They promised if we have renewable energy, we have lots of wind farms and lots of solar, then that will bring bills down, and bills will come down by £300 a year. That's what they promised. But what they've actually achieved is the complete opposite. Now, part of this, of course, is tax, because we've had enormous tax on North Sea oil in the past, and they're now, well, we've had this green energy levy, which has been make tax more expensive. So part of that is the problem, which is our energy is taxed more than the energy in a lot of other countries. But generally speaking, what the Labour Party has done on the economy is a complete disaster, and that's just a small part of it.
As never before. And you're thinking, and I'm thinking of the fact, I repeat, four times the price of what America pays for its electricity for the big companies to produce steel or whatever. Four times the price in Britain. You cannot trade on that basis. As individual houses and householders, we're paying twice the price. Now, there are cracks appearing, which is the good news, because the oil companies are leading a fight back, a pushback, and actually they've got approval at long last for a massive oil field, the biggest one in the North Sea. It's just west of the Shetlands, and another one that's just off the Norwegian coast. That one is mainly for gas. They've actually got the amber light, not the green one, the amber light to go ahead. So, is there any hope?
Yes, it's good that the Labour Party may be changing tack, but what a disaster. I mean, we've had almost 18 months now of a terrible policy that's caused enormous amount of damage to our industry. And now, after 18 months, they're changing tack because they realise what a mess it's been. But no, they should have come into power in 2024 knowing what was going to happen and having thought through these policies and not destroyed the economy before they changed tack. I mean, that's the reality.
A lot of people are thinking of that. I just think simply in that we now, this last year, have spent £1 billion on these wretched windmills to turn them off. That says it all, basically. That's the subsidy we have to pay. £1 billion. Well, Rachel, that comes off your 22 missing billions. It all helps. Every little helps, apparently. Changing topics, Sid. Another question for you. Why aren't the Muslims coming out and marching for peace? I'm comparing that, of course, with the Palestinian marches that are still going on. Why aren't the imams from their churches, their mosques, saying things from their pulpits that are completely again what the average Brit thinks? And in fact, if you want hate speech, you said, go in many of the mosques and you'll hear it all the time. They are keeping very, very stum, especially one thinks of this savagery around the mosques in Heaton Park, Manchester.
Well, yes, because the reality is that in the Quran, Allah is the best of deceivers. And as we said before, one of the key tenets of Islam is the concept of taqiyya. It's a good thing to lie to disbelievers to gain an advantage. So what they say and what they do will be something different. But the reality is that Islam is a virulently anti-Semitic religion. I mean, according to, well, it actually says in the Quran at one point, 456, burn the Jews with fire. But Muhammad is also reported to have said, if you see a Jew behind a rock, then kill him. Kill the Jews. So that's part of Islam. Now, I'm not saying that every Muslim then therefore wants to kill Jews, but it does mean that there are enormous number of radical Muslims who follow the teaching of Muhammad who do want to kill Jews, enormous numbers. And I think when any research has been done, the actual number of Muslims that are radical that follow this teaching is about 30% of all Muslims. So that means that there's about 70% of Muslims that don't want to kill Jews, that are probably perfectly peaceful and so on and so forth. But 30% is still an enormous number, something like 400 million people worldwide. So if we're talking about enormous number that genuinely want to kill Jews and believe in the teaching of burning Jews with fire and killing them. And by the way, when Hamas actually invaded Israel, the instruction from Sinwar was to burn everything that you can find, burn the kibbutz, burn Jews, set fire to anything you can set fire to, following the teaching of the Quran, burn the Jews with fire. So, we have to understand this sort of thing. Now, you see, when you talk about imams in mosques, when they're giving their sermons, they give sermons according to the teaching of Muhammad. So you will find imams in mosques teaching exactly the teaching which I've just told you. And also, it's a good thing to deceive. So you mustn't say this outside. Outside, will give this message, but inside will give this message. That's part of Islam. Now, obviously, the media have got nowhere near getting to grips with this reality. It's because you see, in Judaism and in Christianity, we have this concept of you have to tell the truth. I mean, you must not bear false witness is one of the Ten Commandments. And Jesus said, I am the truth. You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So we're brought up in a Christian environment where everyone at least seeks to tell the truth, or at least telling the truth is a good thing. And anyone that lies is doing something which is evil and wrong. But that's not a concept in Islam. And suddenly this foreign religion is brought into Britain, and the media think they're going by the same standards. And so they quote, oh, for instance, the Hamas Health Ministry has said that there's been 66,000 people have been killed, mostly women and children. Well, when you actually test that, there's nowhere near that could possibly be true. But the media just report it as, oh, these are the figures. The figures from the Hamas Health Ministry, and sometimes they don't even say from the Hamas Health Ministry, just that sometimes they just say 66,000 people have been killed in Gaza, mostly women and children, by the Israeli Defense Forces. No attempt to verify the figures, no attempt to think, oh, they could be lying. They just report the figures. And that's the problem of what we face with Islam.
Indeed, we do. And certain parts of the church are watering things down, some people say, are saying, well, no, don't be too hard on the Muslims, because they could point out things in the Old Testament, in our Bibles, that shows cruelty, appears to be without mercy, and therefore they're only doing their own thing, and it's almost as though the Christians are defending, killing the Jews behind the next rock.
Okay, well, we have to be absolutely clear. Muslims follow the teaching of the Quran. Christians follow the teaching of Jesus, and we look at the Old Testament through Jesus' eyes as Jesus interpreted the Old Testament. So Jesus' command was well, to love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. And he said to Peter, put away your sword. Those who take the sword will perish by the sword. Jesus never engaged in violence and taught his disciples not to engage in violence. Now, okay, you can read stories in the Old Testament where incredible violence takes place. Now, there is accurate history. See, it's interesting. We can prove that the Old Testament is accurate history. And one of the features of the Old Testament is that it brings from many hundreds of years previously. I mean, Moses was 1300 BC, facts which you don't get from other civilizations. I mean, if you go, for instance, to the Assyrian civilization, all the history that's come to us, I mean, which is does come to us on stone slabs. You can see them in the British Museum. We do have history from that period, from the Assyrian civilization, but it's all bragging rights. It's all what incredible things that kings have achieved. There's never any information from Assyria about any battles that were lost. Sometimes you can read behind the scenes to realize there must have been a battle lost, because you see pictures of slaves being carried off, so you realize, oh well, that battle must have been a battle that was lost, but you only read between the lines to try and find that out. But all the inscriptions are all of bragging, only of bragging. But you don't get that in the Bible. In the Bible, it's all warts and all. You get all the defeats, all the terrible things that happen. But none of it is an example for us to follow today. The example we follow today is the teaching of Jesus and how Jesus interprets the Old Testament. And and just for instance, if I can just say very quickly, I mean, on one occasion, Jesus was asked, for instance, don't your disciples wash their hands when they eat? And Jesus said, it's not what goes into your mouth that defiles you, it's what comes out of your mouth. For out of your mouth come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile you. So Jesus said, it doesn't matter what you eat. You can eat pork, you can eat what you like. It doesn't defile you. And he said on another occasion, don't worry about what you wear. So you can look at the Old Testament laws in relation to eating pork and in relation to what you can wear or eating shellfish. And Jesus says they don't matter. So but he says there are some things that do matter. So when it talks, for instance, he talks about fornication, which is actually the Greek word porneia, which means all sex outside of marriage between a man and a woman. Jesus says defiles you. So we look at what Jesus says, and that law is important. So when it says a man should not lie with a man as with a woman, it's an abomination. Jesus says that is an abomination, and it defiles you.
I'm asked the question that we've just covered there many times, and you can understand from what position the average guy is coming from. And it is as simple as you said. The clue is in the name Christian, followers of Christ.
Yes.
And we are nowhere near anything, for instance, that's on the Sermon on the Mount in loving, taking care, and blessings that still, after 2000 and odd years, Sid, to be inspired to attain the life walk of Jesus is something very, very special.
Well, if I can just comment on that quickly. You see, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says It's not just about murder. If you actually hate somebody, you've murdered them in your heart. And it's not just about adultery. If you look upon a woman lustfully, you've committed adultery. And you have to love your enemies and so on and so forth. But at the last verse in Matthew 5, Jesus says, "You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." So I think Jesus is deliberately setting an impossible standard because in the next, it's still in the sermon, in the next chapter, in Matthew chapter 6, he says, when you pray, pray, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. So Jesus says, what you have to do is to ask for forgiveness. You cannot live a good enough life in your own strength. No one can. No one can be perfect. So the only way to get to heaven is to be forgiven. That is the message that is from the Sermon on the Mount, which not everyone understands.
Well, let's go across the pond and go to Mr. Trump to change everything completely. He's got very upset with Chicago and other cities, actually, but Chicago is the one to mention in that there are a number of mayors in various cities that control the purse and where it is spent. And there are some very big projects going on in the big city. Chicago is an example, and they are putting new railway lines up there, government central funding. And he said, "You're not having your 2.1 billion to construct a new railway line until you get professionals in." What does he mean? Well, he means that they're recruiting people depending on their race, depending on their sex, rather than their ability to perform and to produce goods within a budget before and even on time. And you're not having it, he said. And then come along New York, and they're building some overhead railway lines. 18 billion, this is big money. And they're doing a lot of the same thing. One casts one's mind back to BLM days, although we appear to be still in them, according to the Football Association. More of that later. Um, and you think of Seattle and other cities on the West Coast that have got these way out democratic mayors, and they're just allowing people to riot, to spend money just based on DEI. They need controlling, he said, but before we criticise America, and well done Trump again, he's got their head on. What about the mayor of London?
Well, yes. So if I can just comment on America first, it's interesting because Trump is using the fact that a lot of these cities are funded federally to actually say, I'm withholding funds unless you do whatever. And it's in the case of Washington, he actually literally put in the National Guard to deal with the crime in Washington and apparently completely solved all the crime very quickly in Washington, bringing in the National Guard. Because he basically said, the police aren't doing the job in Washington. I'm not going to fund the police anymore. I'm going to bring in the National Guard and very quickly they solved the problem. Now, I think legally he was able to do it in Washington. It's the actual legal ramifications of doing the same in other cities are not so clear. But he threatened to do the same in Seattle and in Chicago and in other cities, bring in the National Guard to deal with the crime. And I believe he may even be attempting to, but of course there's legal battles that he's got to face in doing it. But it's very interesting how he's actually using federal funding. For instance, he's saying any DEI schemes, diversity, equality and inclusion schemes, will not be federally funded. And anyone that's engaging in these schemes will not receive federal funds. So that's probably what Chicago's come against, which you mentioned. But he's also said that if Mamdani gets elected as mayor of New York, who appears to be similar to Sadiq Khan in New York, he basically said, I'm going to stop funding New York, so, which itself will be interesting. But that's something for New Yorkers to think about when they go to the ballot box, because it might be that all their services come to a complete halt if they elect this Islamic extremist as their mayor. But of course, that's what we've got in London. We've got an Islamic extremist as mayor of London, and he's come in with saying that, oh, he's a moderate Muslim and and he supports homosexuality and all these sorts of other things, and he's very liberal and so on and so forth. And he'll do a wonderful job as mayor of London. Don't worry. It's the fact that he's a Muslim is not an issue, and no one should be worried about it. It's he's a very nice man. That's what he came in. But of course, now he's been mayor for quite a long time, and we're beginning to see the reality come to the fore. The reality is he's not a very nice man. The reality is that he's an Islamic extremist. That's the reality. Now we know that because before he became mayor, he was actually a barrister and representing a whole load of people from Al Qaeda. And you could say, oh, well, he said, yeah, I represented some very unpleasant people. But why did they choose Sadiq Khan to represent them? They didn't choose him because he was opposed to their position and he was liberal. They chose him because he supported them. That's the reality. And we're seeing that come to light. I mean, I think one of the nasty things from my point of view was the fact that in Easter, he actually put Ramadan stuff all over Oxford Street. So instead of actually celebrating Easter in London, we celebrated Ramadan. That's the reality of having Sadiq Khan as your mayor. But in terms of running London, he spent more time going around the world saying I represent London than he has actually doing anything. What he's actually achieved in London has been virtually nil. I mean, he's put these ridiculous exclusion zones, up to the M25 and got these 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. But, that's actually annoyed people more than actually achieving anything. I mean, Boris Johnson did brilliantly. I mean, he got new buses all over London. He got the he did away with all the people selling fares at the railway stations and just put machines in place and saved enormous amounts of money by doing that. And he was on the verge of having a new airport for London. If he continued as mayor, he would no doubt would have done that. But Sadiq Khan has done nothing in terms of major schemes.
Staying over the pond at the moment for a little bit longer, we look at the shutdown, which everybody thought, oh, 2 or 3 days, it'll be all over. And this is basically, of course, an argument between the Democrats and the Republicans, because if the Dems get their own way, it'll be open borders again over the Mexican border. So it's something bigger than a local DC incident. Will it be resolved? Does it matter?
Yeah, well, it's very clear to me that there's an incredible amount of inefficiency in government. That's the reality of it. And all these services can be provided far more efficiently and far more effectively if there is the will to do so. But you see, what tends to happen with the Democrats in the United States and with the Labour Party in the UK is that they're more interested in having diversity, equality, inclusion, their pet schemes, net zero, and so on and so forth, than they are running things efficiently. And that's really why we've now got massive problems with debt in the UK. And Trump is actually proving in the United States that being an effective businessman can actually run the services far more efficiently than you're running them. He's proving it.
Right. Akin to that, jumping over to UK in particular, but it does apply to practically every country, and that's the rollout of EVs, electric vehicles. And to give some idea of this, it's costing us as taxpayers £1 billion a year in subsidies to encourage us to buy electric vehicles. Now, having a number of sons who are petrol heads, they've gone and bought these EVs, whether it's total electric, whether it's an American vehicle, i.e. Tesla, or whether it's a hybrid vehicle, half battery, number of different types of hybrid, and they're now largely regretting the purchase. You've always got the problem of driving, as an example, from London to Manchester and panicking on the motorway that you can't wait another 3 hours to charge your battery up. And might I say, one of my sons has actually come out now and said, it's more expensive doing the journeys I do than petrol Petrol is actually cheaper than filling up one of these fast charging units on the motorway. And this is a nonsense. It's not been thought through, the whole thing, basically. Somebody from the Mad Green movement has come along. Oh, we're all going to die. Let's get these vehicles rolled out as quick as we can. Sid, it's a nonsense. Now, these big grants that government give, actually, well done the Scots. They've had another idea without reducing the price of an electric vehicle or subsidising it, I should say. They said, well, we're going to make special charging units for an individual house. So you can charge your car cheaply by electric overnight and not all the restrictions that England approach. Oh, you can't put a cable there. Or you're in a flat, we can't do anything. Not been thought through. A certain young lady many years ago says you can't book the market. You can't, Sid. It's not been thought through. And if they'd have thought through this, if it was right, it would have come of its own stage in life, whether that be hydrogen pods that they're now experimenting with, or hot hybrids, as we've mentioned, or fully electrical vehicles. People are not stupid, but the government, especially a socialist government, no, we know better than you.
Well, yeah, you're right. And you see, one of the problems which you mentioned earlier is that electricity is very expensive in the UK. So since electricity is very expensive, moving to electric vehicles is a problem. And there's another problem which Rachel Reeves has just discovered, because there's a lot of tax on petrol. We have the highest tax on petrol in the UK of any country in the world. I mean, if you go to the United States, which you talked about, you find that petrol prices are probably about a third of petrol prices in the UK. And it's but simply because they don't have the tax on petrol. So, so that, but it's why also, incidentally, you get much bigger price fluctuations in the UK because such a high proportion of the petrol price is tax that it's only just at the margin that the price goes up and down. But that's the reality of it. So we pay a lot more. So if you're all transferring from petrol cars to electric vehicles, the government doesn't collect the tax on the petrol. So it's like, oh dear. So Rachel Reeves is now saying she's going to have to start taxing electric vehicles a lot more. So this is going to be yet another reason for people not to have electric vehicles. Because not only do you have this ridiculous problem of having to stop at a motorway service station and pay for very expensive charging of your vehicle, and sit there waiting for about half an hour while your vehicle recharges. You've also now going to have the problem that the government's going to say, oh, all these taxes that we've had in the past, which have been promoting electric vehicles, we're withdrawing them, and we're now going to start taxing electric vehicles, which in a way, we haven't in the past. That's probably almost certainly going to be in the next budget. So, the reality is, sorry, no. Stay with either petrol cars or hybrid cars. There's nothing wrong with hybrid cars, of course. I think they're excellent because you can charge them if you want, or you can use petrol if you want. And great idea.
Okay, moving on to something quite different, and it's Jordan Peterson. Now, he's well known in the Christian world and in the non-Christian world as a philosopher, one of the big brains available in the World Forum, not the Economic Forum, but in recognition of the wise statements. Now, yes, he is conservative, small c, but makes some very, very good counsel on various subjects. His wife has become a Christian. We don't know. But my goodness me, has he been shut down? Now, I say shut down, he's got terrible neurological problems, which have resulted in pneumonia, sepsis, various other things that can happen with a weakened immune system. And it's a bit concerning, Sid, that so many of the world leaders in a Christian sense, if you wish, have been struck down. It's not logical, is it? You think of Charlie Kirk.
Well, yes, but Charlie Kirk has just gone straight to heaven. So, the person that killed him might think that, he's done the world a service, but he's actually sent somebody to heaven. And the effect on the world of Charlie Kirk's assassination has been so strong that there's numerous people rising up saying, I'm going to follow his example, I'm going to take his place, I'm going to, and we've just recently had this situation in the Oxford Union where somebody who was celebrating his death is now being removed from office because he celebrated his death. I mean, it was a terrible thing to do, but it also showed up a lot of the left wing, frankly, too. Because there were quite a few people on the left who were celebrating his death, and it's just like, and people just turned around and said, "What a horrible person you are, celebrating someone's murder like that." So it actually achieved nothing. But generally speaking, those that follow the truth and follow the teaching of Jesus and live their lives according to the teaching of Jesus will prosper and will be in good health and will benefit from that approach. Those that live lives of killing and hating and so on and so forth, which some do, sadly, will not have happy lives or joyful lives. And funnily enough, if you look at a group of Muslims, you very rarely find, in the mosques, you don't see people smiling or happy or whatever. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying all Muslims are miserable because obviously some, yeah, only pay scant regard to the teaching of Muhammad and so on and so forth. But those who follow it religiously, generally speaking, are not happy people. You go to a church and you see people, and if you go to a church that follows the teaching of Jesus, not a what I call a Kino church, Christians in name only, but if you go to a church that is generally following the teaching of Jesus, you normally see people very loving and very happy and very much enjoying life. That's a generality, but I'm afraid I think there's enormous amount of truth in that generality.
Let's move to Germany. We thought we had enough problems with the United Kingdom. Well, out of Germany comes the following facts and figures. They're working less hours than anybody, certainly on the European continent. As an example, they're even working 3 and 4 days a week. If you want it on an hourly basis, they're only actually working, I think it's 1,340, if I was being accurate, hours a year. Woke's got at them. Work-life balance, that's the new mantra, has got at them. And the government are now waking up to the fact that they've got a real problem here. And they're about to enact the following. Now, will they get away with it, Sid? Okay, you can have your work-life balance, but by the way, you can see from the United Kingdom as an example, we have to retire now at 66 and shortly 67. Well, straight away, Germany are going to say it's 65 here, but from next year it's 73, age 73 before you. That's a mega, but that's all we can afford, folks, unless you want to get back to work.
Phew, dear, I must admit I didn't know that, but it is very interesting that at the moment the German economy is totally flatlined. I mean, they've actually in a situation of nil growth in Germany. So no, actually the lowest growth in the G7 in Germany. And when people sort of say what a disaster it is leaving the European Union, and even Rachel Reeves is saying, "Oh, we're having to pay all the penalty for Brexit. It's Brexit that's caused all the problems in the UK economy." Well, you look at the key engines of the EU, Germany and France, and you see a total stagnation. So what on earth, if we'd stayed in the EU, would have we have been better off than Germany and France? I mean, it's nonsense, isn't it? But Germany's facing enormous problems, and when you think this nil growth is in a situation where they've actually got a lot of people still coming into Germany from Turkey, for instance, which is obviously a lot of burden on their economy, but their population is increasing. So the actual growth per person is even worse than that. I mean, it's strongly negative. in Germany. So yeah, Germany's got enormous problems with its economy, and now it's got a conservative government, I guess. They may well be seeking to get to grips with it because they'll be a lot better getting to grips with it than a socialist government would have been. But of course, the conservative government's not been in for very long. But they will certainly be facing these issues, and it will be painful for some people in Germany, no doubt, because they've got very key issues to face.
How are the mighty fallen? One can remember the days when you bought German stuff because, yeah, it's a bit more expensive, whether it be a car and a washing machine or whatever, but you knew it'll last 10 years and not 4 or 5 years, thinking of the washing machine bit. But now it's all changed. The other favourite saying,
Well,
of course, woke, go broke, and that certainly happened.
Well, yes, at one time we had this stupid idea in the UK that everything had to be poorly manufactured because if it was poorly manufactured, people would have to come back and buy another one after a short period of time. So, the economy will be better off by having everything manufactured poorly, including, like you say, cars, washing machines, everything was poor quality. But in Germany, they took a completely different approach. They considered everything had to be good quality because you see, they realized if they made good quality things, they could export them. And so that would actually bring prosperity to the country. And this is what I'm talking about now, is going on in the 60s and 70s. That's the reality of it. Until eventually Britain realized, oh dear, we're losing out to Germany enormously. We've got to change tack. It's no good just producing everything at low quality. We've got to start producing good quality goods because then that's what will bring prosperity to the UK. And that's what Margaret Thatcher did effectively in her term in office. So in the 80s and 90s, we shifted from everything poor quality to everything good quality. And we've now caught up and overtaken Germany. And, and it's been a change of mindset that's been very painful, but thank goodness we did it.
Right, we're going to talk about Sid's favourite subject now. Another Quango, or, well, it's a sort of Quango called Nesso. And Nesso has been put there by the Labour Party in the United Kingdom because they wanted a watchdog, mainly to see whether there was any chance of us getting clean power by 2030. Oh, yes, there is. We'll get 90% clean power. And nobody believes it. Never mind 2030, they can't even get it by 2050. That's the holy grail. It's not going to happen. But seriously, Sid, what's behind this is scary because Nesso has been got there, put in place by the government, and they're actually having talks, Nesso and the government, about how much to release to the public. They're trying to massage the figures, in other words, and people are becoming put under pressure by this group to meet Ed Miliband's targets and the government's targets because there's no way they can do it. It's the same as house building in the United Kingdom. There's no way we can get to 1.5 million houses by the time this government gets out of power, if it's that long, of course. But this is serious when so many things behind those big doors, Sid, are being fudged, manipulated. We are being manipulated by this government, particularly.
Well, yes. Now you see, netto by netto, I presume you mean net zero, which is what we normally talk about. But yes, now you see, it's very interesting that Trump has taken a completely different line because he understands that the whole thing is just a hoax. Because he actually said in one of his speeches that, oh, well, originally they were talking about global cooling, and then they were talking about global cooling, and we were going to have another ice age, and then they switched from global cooling to global warming, and then that wasn't working, so they then switched to climate change. Of course, well, the climate changes, so they can't be wrong on that. This was Trump actually said that in a speech. So he's like, I'm totally abandoning all this net zero nonsense. I'm just going for drill, baby, drill. We'll have fracking. We'll be energy independent. We'll reduce the cost of energy enormously, which you said they've now got down in the United States, way below the United Kingdom. Now, the United Kingdom is totally following the climate hoax. And why I say the climate hoax is because all this net zero is supposedly to bring no more carbon emissions than we have than we have that is lost naturally. Now, you see, the thing is, carbon is actually good for the environment. And as we said before, in greenhouses over winter, they actually pump carbon into the greenhouse to get plants to grow quicker. And NASA has actually shown that from films from space, the Earth is actually getting greener and producing a lot more food now because of carbon than it was before. So the whole idea that we need to get rid of carbon is just a complete nonsense. See, the only thing that is harmful is sulfur. And if you're producing sulfur from coal, which was coming from coal-fired power station, that is harmful to the environment. And also chlorofluorocarbons are harmful. They were producing a hole in the ozone layer, which was identified some years back. And that was coming from fridges. So we had to get rid of them, and we have got rid of them. And the hole in the ozone layer is now no longer there. Thank goodness. Scientists dealt with it. Scientists realized the problem and dealt with it. But carbon emissions is not a problem. It's a manufactured problem. And it's a manufactured problem because they want to try and create the need for a one world government. And so all these reports that they're doing about global warming is nonsense. And the fact is that the UK, in any case, only produces 1% of the world's carbon emissions. And the extent to which we follow this net zero madness is not going to make any effect anyway because America's completely abandoned it. China's not following it. They've still got massive coal-fired power stations. India's not following it. They're and they're by far the biggest economies in the world. And if they don't follow it, or what we do makes virtually no difference whatsoever. So it's madness. It's utter madness.
Right, we're going to hit our sports spot earlier than usual because politics are getting everywhere, especially sport at the moment. And interesting figures published this last week by the BBC, which we all confidently expected and knew would happen. They're on a binge to get as many ladies in as they can for every presenter's job, of course. Mr. Lineker has been exited stage right. And well, the figures are simple. It's been a dramatic fall, and it is dramatic, of 10%. Might not sound a lot, of viewership. Now, it's not been helped by the fact that on the iPlayer, you can actually see each individual match before match of the day comes on. But those two double whammies have produced a lot less, together with maybe the quality of the pundits there. So online viewing and that have really seen a slippery slope. Now that's the football angle. The other thing is that the FA are here again, saying that people have got to bend the knee again to the god of BLM that's been utterly denounced now by practically everybody. And it was good to see, even for the next 2 weeks and maybe longer, that teams are being encouraged to bend the knee. There are various people. I think one was the captain of Crystal Palace. No, it wasn't. It was whether he did, I don't know. But there are certain people that refuse to bend the knee. They happen to be all black, by the way, which it makes things a bit of a nonsense.
Yes, that was actually what I was going to say, because it's quite interesting that these people refusing to bend the knee are actually black players. And it's like, so you've got white players bending the knee and black players refusing to do so because of what it represents. And it represents basically a false religion, this Black Lives Matter. Um, but what you were saying earlier about Match of the Day is quite interesting because you see, I remember the days where Match of the Day was like the big football program on television, and after going to a match, people would come home and watch Match of the Day, which would then have a summary of what's been going on elsewhere. But these days, there's so much live football on, and there's so many people, there's so many matches now on television that you can really watch as much football as you like, and you can have football, day in, day out, and never stop watching football if you want to. And I think we've people have almost got saturated now to the point that they've no longer really got much interest in Match of the Day. I mean, some people will still watch it, but it's inevitable that the viewership would decline. Whoever was presenting it, that's the reality of it. I mean, I dare say if Lionel Messi was presenting it, people might be more interested just to hear what he's got to say. But because he's so popular. But other than Lionel Messi presenting it, then I'm afraid he's bound to decline. And that's the reality of. I mean, I have Sky TV and I watch football, but I tend to only watch the last 30 minutes of a match because that's the only bit that I'm really interested in. I don't really want to watch it. It's a long time since I've watched a match from the start. I mean, I was very interested in that Liverpool Man United match the other night. I mean, I saw Man United were winning 1-0 and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I watched the end of it and I watched the end of the match and it was quite interesting, but I no longer have an interest in watching a match for 90 minutes or more. It's sorry, it's too much football.
There you go. That from a football addict. What a confession. The FA have not only made you ask you, because it is still voluntary to bend the knee, they're bringing this £600 million cap, which now the leading clubs in the Premiership are objecting to. Uh, they're saying, oh, well, Real Madrid's got 700 million or 800 million. It's a very complicated formula for calculation purposes. And there's too much interference from the bureaucrats again, isn't there?
Well, yeah, I mean, it seems as though spending has got out of hand. I mean, it's quite, I find it interesting that Liverpool have spent this enormous amount of money on Isak. I mean, 130 million on one player. And his attitude was very poor when he decided he wanted to leave Newcastle. He did actually have a contract with Newcastle to 2030. So he signed that contract with Newcastle. He pledged that he would continue to play for Newcastle for another 5 years, and then announced he changed his mind and wanted to leave and go and join Liverpool. And if Newcastle didn't sell him, he wasn't going to play for Newcastle anymore. And when you play that sort of money for a player that has that sort of attitude, I'm sorry, but it's a good chance it's not going to work out very well. And it isn't working out very well at the moment. I mean, he's now playing for Liverpool, and this season hasn't scored a single goal in the Premier League. I believe he scored one in the EFL Trophy or something. But uh, I think. I think clubs have got to be told, there's limits to how much you spend, and there has to be limits to this spending more and more on players. And it's very interesting as well that small clubs like Brentford and Bournemouth are still able to thrive in the Premier League. I find it surprising because, they've got crowds of about 12,000 watching them compared to, up to 60,000, 70,000 watching the big clubs like Arsenal and Man United and Liverpool. So they've got much lower revenue, but they're still able to thrive, simply by concentrating on talent and concentrating on developing youth and so on and so forth. And it goes to show that, it's not all about how much you spend. How much you spend is not the end of the story. You can actually still develop young players effectively and look for potential in lower leagues and develop potential in lower leagues and still do well. And it's good that they're able to stay in the Premier League, these small clubs.
One of the interesting things came out of the Man U Liverpool match, of course, with all the spending of Liverpool. They were nowhere near as collective as a team as Manchester United. So there has been some change at Man U, but you can spend overspend maybe. They've got so many attackers in that team, Liverpool, that you think, oh, it's not gelling, and it certainly didn't at weekend.
Yeah.
So interesting thoughts. Um, let's quickly go back to Trump again, but stay over our side of the Atlantic. The dearest golf club in the world now is Turnberry, owned, of course, by the Donalds. It's £1,000 a round, Sid, and they've got a queue a mile long. And it's certainly, from a business point of view, a success. But the royal and ancient people have decided, oh, we can't have that behind the scenes. Allegedly, we're not going to give them the championships, the Open Championships that perhaps they deserve. It is a fantastic course, even scenically. There you are. The old guys behind the scenes there are still trying to manage things their own way.
Yeah, the reality is, whether you like it or not, that the Trump name is selling all over the world in a variety of different products. I mean, even Truth Social, which I go on, it still is quite popular. But hotels that have got the Trump name, it's like people want to stay in them. I mean, I went to we had the Jerusalem prayer breakfast last year in Mar-a-Lago, or sorry, I should say this year. It was January this year in Mar-a-Lago, Trump's home, and they've got another one which is scheduled, and it sells. I mean, it's costing $1,700 just to go to Mar-a-Lago, and people say, "Yeah, I'll pay it." I mean, I'm not paying it again because I paid $1,000 last time per person to go, and to go as a one-off was a tremendously interesting experience and a valuable experience, and I don't regret it. But it is very, very interesting that people will pay money to see Donald Trump, to be with him, to go to anything that he owns or organizes, and his name is selling now all over the world. And it's not something which is manufactured. I think it's because he is honest, he's charismatic, and his approach is an attractive approach to most people. If you're not woke, if you're not socialist, then Trump is a very attractive person to be alongside.
Well, two little sub items about sport before we go. One is sadly Dickie Bird, umpire, Christian guy, is no longer and will be sadly missed with us. And there's been lots of good things talked about the man. But let's turn to the same sport of cricket and mention Bumble. Bumble has gone from our screens. He went nearly 4 years ago. Time passes quickly, doesn't it? And now we realise because Sky have let him back on a part-time basis, and Bumble committed the unforgivable sin of saying on camera and being honest. And of course, Michael Vaughan has suffered from this as well, even though was in England captain, cricket captain. He did happen to say Bumble at one stage. Well, it would be great if our Yorkshire companions from Asia really joined in most of our social events, because cricket is very social and not kept to themselves. That was good enough for Sky to get rid of him, and he's been sorely missed. But when you get to the truth, how many other people have fallen on the sword, not deliberately, but been pushed onto it by DEI and everything that's woke?
Well, look, there is something else behind this because there were Pakistani players in Yorkshire who did actually take the club to court for racism, and they did actually win a case in court for racism. So obviously, Sky would have been concerned with comments like that and whether they were going to be taken to court. So that's probably why they took very swift action, because obviously it is a concern. And there's also the issue of Ofcom behind as well, because Ofcom has now become a regulator that can impose fines and they do impose fines on people where things are said they don't like. Well, obviously, if Sky took very swift action, it'd be very difficult for them to fine Sky for something that a commentator said that they sacked for saying it. So that would then solve that problem. So unfortunately, it's more a problem of the day and age that we live in than Sky's reaction to an individual statement. But that's the reality of what we have to face. And incidentally, we in the Christian People's Alliance are also coming across this all the time because unfortunately, there's a lot of news programs that won't bring us on because of what we represent in terms of moral standards. The fact that we oppose same-sex marriage, for instance, the fact that we oppose abortion, those simple things are unpalatable to Ofcom. Which is ridiculous, frankly, absolutely ridiculous. But that is the truth of what we now face in British media.
Yeah, in a mess. Finally, we talking about mess. We go to West Ham. Well done, West Ham, especially as supporters. And I was counselling for this months ago with Man U, who were in the pits. Perhaps they're still in the pits. Time will tell. Big problems at Man U, management as well as players. Let hope it improve. Now it hasn't at West Ham. I think it's 8 matches they've lost on the trot. Things are really bad. So the fans this last weekend didn't turn up. Terraces, 3/4 empty. Well done them. Now, if you go and see a theatre performance and it's lousy with rubbish actors, you don't go again until they change it and put on something decent. There's no difference between that and a football match, except one thing: religion. It becomes a religion you've got to support. In Man U case, the Red Devils, significant phrase, and whether they're doing terribly because of bad management, because of bad ownership, bad performance on the football field, they still turn up because it's a religion. Comment, Sid.
Okay, well, as far as West Ham are concerned, this last match was the first match of a new manager, and they did play incredibly badly because I saw some of the match, and really, I mean, West Ham were just getting the ball and kicking it long. I mean, and weren't kicking it in any. I mean, if they were kicking it long to a player that was up the pitch then you say, okay, well, the long ball can be effective, and it's been proven it can be effective. But when they're just kicking it long, just into anywhere, just to get it out the defence, without any plan, then it just becomes terrible football, frankly. And that was what was happening yesterday against Brentford. And I don't blame West Ham fans for saying this is terrible football. And I think with football, unfortunately, when your team is doing well, you can be really excited, enthusiastic, and it's just great. I love football, it's great watching them score goals and win matches. When your team are doing badly and they're playing bad football, it's not a pleasure watching them, quite frankly. And it must be very unpleasant at the moment for West Ham supporters. I mean, hopefully you can turn it round. If they can turn it round, great. But you see, and by the way, while we're talking like this, I think it just goes to show the folly of the way Nottingham Forest behaved last season because they had a tremendous season last season. Their owner was disappointed that at the end they didn't get into the Champions League because they were in Champions League positions and it looked like a distinct possibility. But he let that disappointment show and really attacked the manager on the pitch and so on and so forth, and then ended up sacking him. But look where Nottingham Forest are now as a result. I mean, really, unfortunately, you've got to accept that you can't win every match. And sometimes you will get disappointing results, and you've got to play through that, frankly. You can't afford to sack a manager just because of one disappointing result.
Sid, you've been talking about hoofing and praying when you're talking about the long ball, kicking and praying. Well, it may work for teams like Crystal Palace, probably has done, because they've got a number of Christians on board and they can do the praying. Don't don't neglect that completely. Sid, we've got to go. I know you've got an answer for that, but I'm not letting you use it. And we'll see you next week.
Okay, thanks.